Great. So thank you everybody for coming today to the first of our Tyndall resilience theme conversations. I'm Johanna Forster, so I am one of the co-leads for the Tyndall resilience theme. Talk about resilience across different sectors. And so this is the first one. And the reason why we wanted to do this was we have obviously lots of conversations in Tyndall about what resilience means, and I'm sure we all hear it all the time in the work that we do. But actually what it means and how we operationalize it, how we actually make it happen, I think there are some, I don't think necessarily we know the answers to that. So the purpose of this session is really to discuss that. We picked two speakers, Nick Hepworth is one of them, and Dania, who I hope will be able to join us shortly. And we have asked them both to sort of pitch their views on this.
Resilience, I mean, it's one of those words like water security that can be applied to lots of things in lots of different ways. So at different scales, you know, resilience at household scale, individual scale, country scale, catchment scale, resilience of a business, resilience of a sector. And it's also got, you know, resilience of whom to what, so it's sort of directional, of what to whom, and they're really important things to consider. And like water security, I guess we've got to be thinking about shared resilience. Yeah, so we can't forget that one entity's resilience can come at the expense of other people's resilience. So we really got to think about justice when we use these phrases. And of course, there's lots of different ways to think about resilience and different components of it. Whether it's through, you know, think of social resilience, resilience of people and households, communities. You know, it's if we think of the IPCC definition, which I've drawn on here, that the ability of a system to anticipate, absorb, or recover from shocks or hazardous events is how the IPCC have termed it. You know, there's lots of components to that. You know, the access to resources, to finance, access to education, access to security of tenure of resources, and livelihoods. So there's a whole range of ways of thinking about resilience and a lot of complexity there. What I'd like to do today, if I can, is to zoom into a practical aspect of resilience that I'm familiar with, to sort of anchor our discussions there. And what I want to zoom into is the question of what water managers can do to support the resilience of society to droughts, and we can talk about floods, but drought events. Because that's an area that we've been looking at for the past 10 years with Water Witness, but also I have some operational experience from my days at the Environment Agency, so I'm able to sort of compare and contrast across those two spheres of work. Does that sound sensible? So that's where I'd like to step into the operationalization of resilience from a water management perspective.
Yeah, I think that sounds fantastic.
Yeah. The other words you used in the setup, recovery, adaptation, obviously, you know, we could, to my mind, adaptation is the longer term adjustment to climate change, which is also a big question to dive into from a water management lens. But perhaps given the time we've got, I want to look at this anticipation, absorption, recovery from shocks. Okay. So I think that the water resource managers and water service providers have got a really important role to play in resilience and responding to climate change, but also to drive social and economic progress more broadly. So when we've been working with DFID and the World Bank and others on this, often the sort of catchphrase is, you know, if you want resilience, let's look at making existing institutions function properly, right? So but there's a key aspect. Let's not start designing new things. Let's try and make the institutions that should be functioning to manage our water function effectively. And I think that's a really important starting point, because droughts happen anyway, right? And the predictions are it's simply going to get worse and more frequent. So it will serve as well, certainly in terms of uncertainty, to think about functional water management institutions. Now, how the Environment Agency, and before them the National Rivers Authority, planned for droughts and floods is this. And I'm not saying that's what should happen everywhere, but it's a model that we can draw from. So first of all, you'd want to understand your catchment. Yeah, so you'd need some data, and you'd need to have some hydrological analysis to think about return events, right? So what level of risk are you working to? Then you'd understand the nature of demand and use in your catchment and the various water needs, and their vulnerability to drought or flood events. So whether that's because of where they are, because of the nature of the activities that take place, and you'd be able to arrive at some level of prioritization that's probably dictated at a higher level in policy or law that tries to prioritize human health needs or environmental needs over and above commercial uses of water. So strategically important uses of water would be prioritized. And then you start to unpack that and say, well, what are the risks here? What do we need to plan for? And how can we mitigate the impact of events? Can we look at interventions like storage and storage reservoirs, which would enable an activity to continue based on the return event that you're planning around? So you would have a basic sort of framework of availability, need, and a sort of risk sliding scale of what you want to plan for. And then you get into the business of trying to predict and plan for what happens if there is a drought, and modeling that ahead of time, so you've got a bit of warning. So my first job when I graduated from environmental sciences at UEA was as a hydrologist for the then NRA, and my job was to basically look at the levels of all the reservoirs in the northwest of the UK and work out when, excuse my language, the shit was going to hit the fan in terms of running out of water, and then use that knowledge to inform decision making about scaling back to protect the priority needs of water. So you've got a drought, you're monitoring the rainfall, and there's a system of phased alerts, so that okay, we're approaching a drought setting in these catchments, so we need to plan for this response. And this response would be possibly a drought order, negotiations with the water companies, with farmers, to scale back to protect priority uses, using statutory measures and enforcement where necessary. And drought orders are a statutory measure to basically adjust people's abstraction licenses for a temporary period to protect the priority uses. So that's a basic model of how, an arguably effective model of how the UK and water resource managers here have managed drought shocks, and protected society's priorities within our normal or increasing levels of variability. What I didn't perhaps emphasize, in terms of the justice of this and making sure that, if there is shortage and you're scaling back water use to manage a drought, to protect priority uses, this is when water tenure becomes really important, right? Because you need to know who's using what water for what purposes. And in lots of parts of the world, you don't have the same kind of water abstraction permitting coverage that you would have in the UK. At the same time, there have been attempts over the past 30 years through integrated water resource management to put in place systems of water rights allocation, so that if you're a water user and you're taking water out of the ground or a river, you've got a permit that tells you when you should do that, but it also gives you a statutory right of access that needs to be considered during times of drought restrictions. And that's a really important mechanism for trading off and ensuring there's justice in who gets what water during drought times. Now, there's a brilliant bit of work that you need to know about, and I'm sure you are. Stephen Hodgson and the team at FAO and others at the Environmental Law Institute on water tenure, and how different conceptions of water tenure, which sort of usefully bust out from the customary water rights and formal water rights arguments, and they talk about the need for a diverse set of water tenure mechanisms that are useful and applicable in different contexts. And I think there's a great deal of academic and practical work to be done over the coming years to develop the idea of security of water tenure and all that says about justice and resilience. But I would point you to Stephen Hodgson's great work on that. But it is, you know, water tenure is going to be really important in terms of resilience. You know, people's legal claims or semi-legal claims to water access suddenly gets really important when you're talking about drought restrictions. And if you think of, you know, pastoralists, for example, are typically looked over in terms of issuing of water rights. There are very few systems out there that allow for a pastoralist water right, which basically locks pastoralists into conflicts during times of drought. So there's lots to talk about on that. I hope that makes sense. Any other questions? Clara, you've had your hand up for a bit.
Yeah, so I just wanted to ask more of a general question about the word resilience, and is this does this have sort of different standards from place to place? Are there some countries that would say, you know, resilience is when you're able to carry on business as usual, so, you know, even water fountains are still running or things like that, really kind of excessive? Or are there differences where resilience means still being able to have drinkable water? You know, how does that change from place to place, and how does that play into resilient strategies?
Really brilliant question. It needs to be defined, right? And it's often not, and that is a failure because it undermines any accountability for resilience. So it's a word that can be bandied about. You know, we need resilience. It almost becomes a bit meaningless, and can be used as to, you know, by the powerful elites that benefit from the status quo to securitize that status quo. So you know, my resilience is that I get water and it's important for the economy. Never mind you downstream users. Our national resilience depends on me getting the water I need to run my business or produce X, Y, Z. So there's lots of, you know, it can be politicized and used by different interests. I think it would be really important to define at various levels what is actually meant by resilience and what the plan is for ensuring that, and having that set out so that it's transparent and that people can be held to account, like I say, held to account for delivery against it. And it's often not. I don't think I've ever seen that written beyond the machinations of a sort of drought plan, a participatory drought plan. You know, I haven't really seen explicit definitions of resilience in a water management sphere.
Thank you.